Indiana in the Morning, presented by First Commonwealth Bank and its AM 1160 WCCS and 101.1 FM. Governor Tom Wolf, of course, yesterday with his annual budget address. It happens on the first Tuesday of every month, and it came yesterday, or of the month of February. It came yesterday in Harrisburg. State Representative and House Majority Leader Dave Reed was among those in the audience at in the state capitol, and he's on the telephone with us this morning in Harrisburg, where the hard work starts to get underway. Good morning.
Good morning, Todd.
Interesting, some of the comments after the budget address yesterday, including yours, saying that the governor's budget proposal is a realistic starting point, and that's an interesting way to characterize it. What gives you hope? What are the main points that give you hope that this budget process might be a little smoother than what we've experienced the last 2 years?
Well, I think it's all relative, and it's a matter of historical perspective. If you look 2 years ago, he came to the General Assembly proposing a $12 billion tax increase over 2 years, millions and upon billions of increased spending and increased borrowing. And the very fact, that he took increases to the income tax and sales tax off of the table back in December, and then took serious our challenge to have a conversation about restructuring government. He put about $2 billion worth of mergers and consolidations and efficiencies and spending reductions in this particular proposal. I think it's a good start. It's a better start than we've had previously. There's a lot of questions over some of the other proposals he put in to this particular budget document, because he is still looking at about $1 billion worth of revenue in one form or another. So obviously there are going to be some concerns in that regard. He put a couple other policy items into the mix, but really left out two very big policy items that are important to us in Indiana County and the General Assembly: pension reform and property tax elimination. Now, he tells us he's very serious about those issues and wants to have that discussion as well. Hopefully some of those issues can come to a conclusion, particularly pension reform, before we actually consider a budget this year, and then we can move on to property tax elimination as well. So I think it's a better starting point than we've had in the past. Certainly there are going to be some disagreements, a lot of questions, both on policy and logistics, but I'd rather start at this point than with a $12 billion tax increase.
The pension system has been such a key for the budget process the last 5 or 10 years, and it's really a case of we kicked the can down the road for as long as we could, and now it absolutely has to be done, or else there can be no real budget reconciliation in Harrisburg, can there?
No, and you look at, there's 4 basic cost drivers driving up our budget every single year. One is our correctional institutions, just with inmate population. We're starting to see some progress there with the inmate population declining in recent years and projected to decline in the future. Our debt obligations, much of which was left over from even the Rendell administration almost a decade ago now, are our costs in regard to our pensions, and pension reform is not just a budgetary fix. In fact, I think more importantly, it is securing those pensions for the retirees, for the active employees, and for the future employees, but making sure the taxpayers aren't left holding the bag again if something should happen in the future. And, of course, the 4th major cost driver is the Department of Human Services. And I think the governor took a very aggressive approach about finding efficiencies, mergers, and consolidations within our entitlement spending, just in relation to some of the federal mandates, and hopefully some stuff we could do at the state level to help really drive down those costs.
Some of the items that look to be real areas of contention once we get into the hearing process and then the negotiations include the business climate, improving employment, getting the state and other taxing bodies off the backs of business owners. I would think the proposal for the increase in the minimum wage would be a non-starter with Republicans. If you're telling a guy on Philadelphia Street who's operating a business with 4 employees, you have to pay them another $5 an hour, every single one of them, but you have no way to increase your revenues, just take it out of your pocket and give it to them. That would be a problem.
Well, it's a huge problem. And when you look at some of the minimum wage proposals out there, the governor proposed $12 an hour yesterday. Some of our Democratic colleagues have proposed anywhere from $15 to $20 an hour for a minimum wage. And this is a minimum wage, not a final wage, not a living wage, a minimum wage. And, I think if folks wanted to have a discussion on keeping the minimum wage up to inflation, which gets you in the $8.50, $9 an hour range, that's something that the public generally is accepting of, because you want to keep up with inflation along the way. But to double or triple the minimum wage all at one time, all you're really going to end up having is an awful lot more folks on the unemployment lines as opposed to making more money.
State House Majority Leader Dave Reed is with us this morning, and we're talking about yesterday's budget address by Governor Wolf, the spending plan, about $32.3 billion. Education funding is always a big part of that. The governor proposing more funding for education. How do you think those discussions will go once the hearings get underway before both of the appropriations commissions, both on basic education and higher education?
Well, I think a lot of the hard work on basic education was taken care of in the last 2 years, particularly with the enactment of a new basic ed funding formula. So you won't have a discussion on how we drive out those dollars anymore. We have a new funding formula in place. And I think when you're looking at what the governor's looking at for basic ed, special education, and higher education, they're much more reasonable approaches than we've had in the past, much more in line with not, I wouldn't say reality, but just, the stark fiscal situation that we're in right now across the Commonwealth. And really, the basic education discussion also really leads into the discussion both on pension reform and property tax elimination as the way we fund our local school districts. So we would like to get to those items, not just the budgetary side of the equation.
Some of the conversations about education funding include the issue of local control and whether or not by changing formulas, changing procedures in the way we fund schools, it takes away control from local school boards over the districts that they administer. How do you fall on that particular end of the conversation?
Well, I think generally the more local control, the better. And you could do property tax elimination in a number of different manners. It's not saying as if all of the money has to come from state government. You could raise some of the money locally, just not with a school property tax. So, the right balance has to be made for the future of funding our local school districts and allowing our homeowners to actually keep the homes that they've worked very hard to buy. Overall, I think local control versus state control is a matter of perspective. What I've generally found in the last decade or so, most folks want local control unless they are in disagreement with what the local governing authority is doing. Then they want state control. If they disagree with the state, then they want local control. So I think what we really need overall is just sound fiscal decisions that meet the public's expectation of how they want whether a school district to operate, a borough, a county, or state government to operate.
The higher education formula is a little bit more difficult because there are so many different aspects of it. And the management of the state system of higher education has to come up with ways to spend its money more efficiently. Those negotiations and those hearings should be very, very interesting coming up on, February 23rd, when the state system comes before the appropriations committees.
Yeah, they are, and I think they're actually taking a very proactive approach. They're going to go through a study of the entire state system and find out how that system should operate and look in the year 2017 and beyond. The systems basically look the same for, decades, and we have a situation where you've got schools like Westchester, IUP, Bloomsburg, Shippensburg, Kutztown, who are doing fairly well overall. But you've got some other schools out there that have been really struggling. We will have one state system school right now with only 700 students that's located within 3 miles of another state system school. So we really need to determine what is the mission of the state system. How do we allow the schools that are excelling to continue to excel? How do we prevent schools that are on the borderline from dipping down into the red financially? And how do we repurpose some of the schools that have been struggling for some time to meet the needs of our students, but not bring down the rest of the system in the process?
Our closing moments here with State Representative Dave Reed joining us from Harrisburg. So one of the things that I think folks don't realize is that it is not just a matter of the governor making a request and the legislature coming up with some sort of response, but you are dealing with individual caucuses within each chamber in the Capitol building. With the administration itself and all of its different departments. This is really a complicated process that will get underway now with this hearing schedule. Take me through the timeline and some of the issues that you think are going to be more major snags, potentially, that are out there for this budget process.
Well, you really have 5 different parties negotiating. You have the 2 House caucuses, the 2 Senate caucuses, and the administration. And look, each caucus, our leaders, including myself, we're elected to represent, in my case, 121 House Republican members, and to work with the Democratic leader who's elected to represent 82 Democratic members. And then we're each elected individually to represent 64,000 people back home. My folks, obviously, from Indiana County, where I live with my family. But, there's a lot of different perspectives to be represented in state budget negotiations. 13 million people have to be represented in one form or another during those discussions. And it's a complicated process when you're dealing with a $32 billion budget negotiation. But the governor kicked that off yesterday. We'll go through the appropriations hearings over the next couple of weeks in the House and the Senate to really flush out some of the administration's proposals, figure out which ones work, which ones don't work, which ones make sense, which ones don't make sense. And then you get down to the nitty-gritty of beginning the process, probably with a budget moving through the House as a beginning document. And then the real hard negotiations start to ensue after that. And a lot of them are based upon what the revenue collections will look like in the state over the next couple of months. 2 or 3 months from now, we'll have better information as to what, year-end personal income tax filings look like, what corporate tax filings look like, and what the true revenue picture will be towards the end of June.
He's State Representative Dave Reed. Thanks so much for taking some time out of it. I know what has been a hectic schedule for you to join us this morning.
Not a problem. Have a good day, Todd.
You too, Dave. There's State Representative Dave Reed. We appreciate his time here this morning on Indiana in the Morning, as always presented by First Commonwealth Bank here on AM 1160 WCCS and 101.1 FM. We've taken it right up to the deadline here. So have a wonderful Wednesday, and we'll talk weather tomorrow. It's going to be a major issue.